Hi folks, welcome to the wrap up for this year's reading for 2024. In this video we'll be looking at 139 science fiction books that I've read this year. They're all science fiction of various ages, sizes and quality, it turns out. I'm not going to be too rigorous about checking what scores I gave these in the monthly wrap-ups. It's going to be more about how I feel about these books now, what my recollections are, how well they've stuck with me, for good or ill. And so they might well change. So if you can be bothered, you can compare and contrast. I'm using a tier list maker app thing on the interweb, and it's put the book images in alphabetical order. So it's not the order that I read them in, or in order of score or anything like that. It's just the way that they came out in this list. So unfortunately, we're going to start with A Case of Conscience by James Blish, which I think I'm going to call a cosmic catastrophe. I don't know, is that fair? It's either a nebulous narrative or a cosmic catastrophe. The first half of it I really enjoyed, so I would probably put that in planetary pleasure, maybe even stellar splendor. And it was really good, really interesting, on an alien planet with an exploration unit who basically charged with deciding whether or not the planet should be colonized or treated with or whatever. And then the second half, and that was quite interesting, and then the second half was on Earth a bit later on and just didn't hold my interest at all. In fact, if I remember rightly, I bailed, didn't even finish the book. I chickened out and switched to Wikipedia to find out how it ended. I think if the book's only half good, then it's really not very good at all. So I'm going to go with Cosmic Catastrophe. Maybe that's a bit harsh on A Case of Conscience, but I didn't get on with it at all. Verna Vinge, Deepness in the Sky. I really enjoyed this. I think somewhere between. Let's go with Stellar Splendor. So it was really good. Actually a prequel to A Fire Upon the Deep, although they're not at all related except by one character, basically unrelated. You could read them completely separately. Really good book, really good aliens. And then we've got Alien Clay, which was okay. Brand new book from Adrian Tchaikovsky this year, and it was pretty good. It suffered from being read very shortly after Cage of Souls, which I think is a much better book by him, and I felt that it borrowed some elements from that. And not really science fiction, arguably. It's an alternative telling of the space race from the Soviet perspective, and imagines a world where, but for one or two sliding doors moments, the space race might have been very different. And the scenes in the Korean War where they're effectively fighting a proxy war on behalf of North Korea is really cool. Some really great dogfight scenes, really, really good. David Webber, on Basilisk Station, I think is a planetary pleasure. Pretty good. I liked the character Honor Harrington. I don't know that I like it enough to read like the million that there are in that series right now, but I do have a couple of others on my shelf, but they're further down in the series. So unless I happen across books 3, 4, 5 and 6 or whatever it is, then I don't think I'll bother. Adrian Tchaikovsky, Bearhead, Stellar Splendor. As we'll talk about, probably preferred Dogs of War, but Bearhead was good. I liked Honey as the character, the 9-foot bear or whatever that she is. And in this book, she is no longer in corporeal form, and the reasons for which become apparent in the book. Before Mars by Emma Newman. It's the final book I think it's the final book, maybe it's the third. I can never remember which order they go in. It doesn't really matter because they're like a mosaic. Anyway, there is a sort of vague sequence to them, but they all stand alone pretty much. And Before Mars, it was pretty good, but not my favourite. I think my favourite was probably somewhere between After Atlas and the original Planetfall. I like both of those. Chris Beckett were Beneath the World at Sea. I think planetary pleasure. I've enjoyed exploring some of Chris Beckett's books this year. I like this one. It didn't really go very far, light on plot and heavy on atmosphere, and that's fine. It was very well done, and I did quite like it. And it had a couple of nice kind of zonal science fiction elements to it. There was the Zone of Forgetting and then the Submundo. There we go. Ken MacLeod, Beyond the Hallowed Sky, Stellar Splendor. This is the most fun I've had with a Ken MacLeod book so far. I've enjoyed what I've read of his mostly, with one exception that we'll talk about in a bit. This is the first of the Lightspeed trilogy, and I really enjoyed it. I need to get on and read books 2 and 3, which I haven't got to yet. It was good. Jack Vance, Big Planet. It's as the name suggests, a party crash lands on a big planet, and they're tens of thousands of miles from where they need to be, and it's a bit of a trek story. It's a slender book, less than 150, 200 pages tops, and I think there are at least one other, maybe 2 or 3 others in, I think it's the Planet of Adventure series that are set on this planet. Pretty good. Nothing to write home about. Bloom by Will McCarthy, Stellar Splendor. I really enjoyed that. That's a recent-ish space opera. I forget when exactly it is, from late 90s, early 2000s maybe. It's set in a world where there are sort of nanoscale blooms, so-called outbreaks, which are super problematic for humanity, to the point where in their not too distant history, the entire Earth has been consumed by one of these nanotech outbreaks. And it's a job to keep on top of it. And pretty good as a bit of a chase across the solar system. I enjoyed it. Ward Moore, Bring the Jubilee. I think I'm going to put that on Galactic Gem. I really enjoyed it. I'm fond of an alternative history, and this is an interesting one. It's not the only book to have considered the possibility that the Civil War went a different way, in the US Civil War, that is. So in this book, the Confederacy won, and the US has been reduced to sort of rump, and it's set partly in New York, in a very different New York City in the 1930s or 40s, sort of almost 100 years after the Civil War went very differently. So it's very interesting to see the kind of alternate history pieces of it, and there's even a bit of cheeky time travel thrown in towards the end. But most of all, beautifully written, and it's a pretty old book. I forget exactly when it was, late 1950s, early 1960s. So it's pretty long in the tooth now. Let us see what we've got here. William Gibson, is that Burning Chrome or Neuromancer? I think that's Burning Chrome. Planetary Pleasure. Short stories, not 100% my bag, but it was a good introduction to the Neuromancer world. There's 2 or 3 stories set in this collection that are set in the same universe with some of the same characters that are in Neuromancer, so it was a good introduction. Tchaikovsky, Cage of Souls. I really, really enjoyed this. I listened to it on audiobook. I thought the narrator did a fantastic job of bringing the characters to life. And it was listening to this that sort of, I think, kind of spoiled my enjoyment of Alien Clay, in that it's just much better than Alien Clay. And Alien Clay tries to do some of the same things as Cage of Souls, I thought. And in the process, it was an unfortunate comparison. So Alien Clay, probably something that I will reread at some point, see if a bit of distance makes a difference. Ken MacLeod, the aforementioned Ken MacLeod. I think I'll put that on Stellar Splendor as well. So that's the Cassini division, which is the 3rd of the Full Revolution books, his earliest books. And of the 3 of those that I've read so far, this is the one that I like the best. Star Fraction and Stone Canal were both good, but I think I read those the previous year, but I think I probably would have put them on Planetary Pleasure, I think. Really good. The most space opera-y of those 3 books. And it's got some really cool scenes set on a future Earth, which I really enjoyed. Asimov, Caves of Steel, Planetary Pleasure, pretty good. Whodunit, written way back in the 50s, I think, and it's among not the very first, but among the first kind of dozen or so, I would guess, science fiction books that I read as a teen. So I have a bit of a soft spot for them. So it was a reread for me. Enjoyed it. Centauri Device. I think I have to put this in nebulous narrative. Nebulous narrative. Oh, I forgot there for a minute what NN stood for. Nebulous narrative. It was written, allegedly, as an anti-space opera. It had an anti-hero, and it was grungy and not at all hopeful or positive or adventurous in the way that space opera was. But I think most people read it at the time as a straight-up space opera, and I think M. John Harrison doesn't like it now. He thinks it's a bunch of crap. I like some elements of it, but I thought I tripped over what is undoubtedly very clever prose, and I struggled a little bit as a result. I didn't leave it feeling like I'd enjoyed it. I felt like it was a chore to read, which is not what you want. Alistair Reynolds, Century Reign. I listened to this on audiobook. I'm going to go with Planetary Pleasure. Pretty good. It's like got detective noir elements set on a Paris like ours, but not like ours, for reasons that become apparent. Pretty good, and some space opera elements to it as well. China Mountain Zhang, I'm going to put on Stellar Splendor. I read that quite recently, actually, and it's set in a world which has gone very differently. It's set in the early 22nd century, I think, in a world in which, for whatever reason, capitalism has sort of fell apart, and Chinese Marxism / communism / whatever it ended up being is the dominant ideology in the world, and that China is the economic powerhouse of the world. But it's set in a New York City. Sort of, you could argue nothing much really happens. It It's more a vehicle to explore what the world's like. It's a world building exercise with some character work and some plot. But I really enjoyed the world building aspects of it, so I was good with that. John Wyndham, Chucky. Let's go with Planetary Pleasure. Not my favourite Wyndham. It was a first time read for me this year. I've read a bunch of Wyndham before, but not this one. And it was pretty good. So it's the elements of sort of parental angst, almost panic about what's happening to their child. What could possibly be wrong with him. It was pretty good, I think. Dark Eden by Chris Beckett. That's a galactic gem. I read all three of the Eden trilogy this year, so they'll all make an appearance. But I think Dark Eden probably I found particularly good. The world building in this was fantastic. The premise is that we're on a planet which doesn't orbit a star. It's a wandering planet, and it's completely dark except for the bioluminescence of the plants and the animals that are on the planet. And there's some geothermal warming, which makes it habitable. The book begins with a community of about 500 people, all of whom are descended from two astronauts that were stranded on the planet some, 150 years ago, something like that. And because they're all related to those two, the gene pool's a bit limited, and there are deformities, physical and mental, which make things quite difficult. And it's a story of schism and masculinity, and not necessarily a good thing in this case. So I really enjoyed the characters and the setting, and I thought it was very well drawn and very well written. I really enjoyed it. So that's a book that I will go back to again. I think I really liked it. Dark Matter was a confection, an airport thriller dressed up as a science fiction book. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it while I was there. Completely forgettable. Mother of Eden, I did enjoy it, but less than Dark Eden. So I'm going to put it on Stellar Splendor. Pretty good. Continues the story. There's a time skip forward a little bit. Things have developed somewhat. We're in the sort of children and grandchildren of the characters in the first book, and as I say, society has developed. We've got towns now, but there are still factions, and things are dangerous. Pretty good. Death of Grass. Really enjoyed it. It's a quick read, about 150 pages, and it is the very fast fall of society and civilization set in England, in the face of catastrophic loss of crops around the world, and there is no food, and it goes south really fast. Deep Wheel Orcadia, actually technically shouldn't be in here because I DNF'd it, but fuck it, I'll keep it. But certainly it's a cosmic catastrophe. Pretty poor. I think the notion was pretty clever. It's a story told in both Orcadian, which is a dialect from the Orkney Islands, but potentially like a slightly futuristic Orcadian and a futuristic English/Scots. So they're parallel. One, the Orcadian on the top and supposedly English, but future compound words, sometimes with 4 or 5 individual words munged together to make one big one. And both of them were fucking difficult to get the hang of. And I just found it extremely hard work for a book. And I think if you're having to work hard, then it feels like homework and not pleasure. And I got probably 25%, 30% of the way through it and thought, screw this for a game of soldiers. I'm just not interested in ploughing through that. I'm sure it's very clever, and I'm sure it's technically very well done, but much too clever for its own good, and it lost me pretty quickly. Right, what have we got next? Let's do this slightly out of order for reasons that become apparent. So Christopher Rocchio, Empire of Silence. That's the first book in the Sun Eater series. It is out and out space opera. It is not trying to do anything clever or too clever. It is entertainment. It is popcorn reading. It is widescreen on the IMAX cinema in book equivalent. I loved it. I'm all here for a bit of space opera. I don't mind being challenged and tested in my science fiction reading from time to time. But quite often I just want to be entertained, and this was entertaining. It is science fiction for people that like fantasy. There's elements of written by when Rocchio was pretty young, in his early 20s, I believe, and it does borrow. Let's say it's heavily influenced by a number of kind of science fiction staples, including Dune, for example. But there's bits of sword and sandal in there. There's gladiators, but I really enjoyed the scope of it and the scale of it. Okay, Dogs of War by Tchaikovsky again. There's a few of his books in this year's reading. Dogs of War, I think, is really good. That might be one of my favourite Tchaikovsky easy for me to say. One of my favourite Tchaikovsky books, along with probably Children of Time and Cage of Souls. I really liked it. I like the premise of it. I like the characters. I like the interplay between Rex and Honey, the bear, and the rest of the squad, as they go from being aiming to please military attack squad, kind of special forces, biomorph special forces, and they are pretty formidable at that. And then as they go on their journey, it's starting to wonder, are we the bad guys? And the transition that they go through as a result of that, I think, is really cool. Surprise hit for me, let's call it a stellar splendor, Early Riser by Jasper Fforde. It tells a story of an alternative UK, really alternative Wales, which is where Jasper Fforde is from, or where he lives. This tells a story of a world in which basically we're still in an ice age, and the winters are extremely severe and unsurvivable for most humans. And the way that the world has coped with this for the last couple of thousand years at least is by hibernating. So humans, like bears or hedgehogs, hibernate for the winter, and there are people that are charged with looking after them when they're asleep. The protagonist in this book, whose name I forget, is one such minder. All sorts of mad shit happen during this long winter. It's the first Jasper Fforde book that I read. I really, really enjoyed the world building. He does have like a machine gun wit, and he kind of pebble dashes you with witty remarks in the text, and I thought that was going to get wearing at first, but it kind of worked on me, and I really enjoyed it after a little while. Once I had my ear in, I was good with it. Eastern Standard Tribe. Do you know what? On reflection, it was all right. Nothing special. Top end of nebulous narrative. Some interesting aspects of it. I think it was his first novel, and he narrated it on. I listened to it on audiobook, and he narrated it, and he was a bit of a tedious narrator, a bit dull. Bob Shaw, Planetary Pleasure short story collection of his work. I would have to have a flick through it to remind myself of what stories in it I enjoyed. If I remember rightly, there's one about the Mona Lisa, which I quite enjoyed, and I'm sure there are a couple more, but not particularly memorable, haven't stuck in my head. I find that's a failing for me generally with short stories. I tend to plough through them just to get through them, and I don't really kind of linger to enjoy them as I go. That's probably something for me to work on. Let's see. I don't want to big it up any more than it needs to be. I go low end of Stellar Splendor. Empire in Black and Gold. It's the first of the Shadow of the Apts book. It's a fantasy book that snuck into my reading recently. You know, having focused on science fiction for the last couple of years, I was a little bit kind of wary of reading it, thinking, oh God, am I going to get dragged back into fantasy? And you know, do I really want to start reading like it was 9 or 10 book series? But I really enjoyed it. I thought that the world building was, as a theme actually, world building was really good, and I like the plot, I like the characters. The premise here is that people, different races of people, have affinities with different insects. It sounds a bit mad, but it works pretty well. Engines of God was... it was all right. I enjoyed it while I was there, but nothing memorable. There are another 6 or 7 books in that series, and I'm not in a hurry to read any more of them. And I might actually jettison Engines of God. I don't think it's worth the inch and a bit of shelf space it takes up currently. Like I say, nothing bad to say about it really, just that it wasn't very good. It wasn't great. It was good. John Wyndham is God tier, obviously. Galactic Gem. Day of the Triffids. It's my favourite John Wyndham. And there is a video on the channel from a few months back ranking John Wyndham's post-war novels, and without spoiling that video for you, The Day of the Triffids was top dog. It's a reread for me. It was one of the first science fiction books that I've ever read when I was aged 11 or so. I have a huge soft spot for it ever since. Classic catastrophe book. As a double catastrophe, really. A comet that blinds everybody overnight, apart from a few people that were lucky enough not to see the cometary lights. And then the 1-2 punch is from the Triffids, which are mobile, lethal plants that are exhibiting signs of a herd intelligence. Really, really good. Really stands up pretty well considering it was written in the early 50s. Beastmaster by Andre Norton. It's a story of a Native American, Navajo guy who's committed some kind of shameful deed in his past and is starting a new life on another planet, which basically is like the Wild West transported to another planetary location. So there's not space opera. It's like it's a thinly disguised Western, essentially, on another planet. Greg Bear, Forge of God. I enjoyed myself. Stellar Splendor. The clue to what happens is very much on the front cover, so you can work out for yourself the fate of the Earth just from that image. But in this book, there are some aliens who arrive on Earth, one promising riches and technological development and a helping hand, and the other saying, you're fucked, basically, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. And one of them is telling the truth and one of them isn't. And it's a story of how humanity deals with that dichotomy and the assistance that's later provided. There is a sequel, Anvil of Stars, which I haven't got to yet. Fractal Noise, Cosmic Catastrophe. So I sort of enjoyed To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which was his first kind of space opera book. And this is set in the same universe, but with none of it's not connected in any way, really. The biggest crime for this book was it was just really boring. There are some people that need to go and explore a giant hole on a planet or a moon, and that is that out of that hole is coming a signal, and they want to go figure out what the signal is telling them, and it's very loud, and they have to trek. They can't they can't land their ship near it because it's sensitive to the electromagnetic emissions of this thing, and so they've got this massive trek, and it's like a polar trek across this planet. They're pulling sledges. They get fucked up by the electromagnetic emissions. There are some things, objects, artifacts, aliens, whatever, on the planet that interfere with their progress. And some of that's interesting, but generally speaking, it's just boring, and that's a cardinal sin for me in a book of any kind, especially a science fiction book. Frankenstein Unbound, I'm going to call a planetary pleasure. Some elements of it I quite enjoyed. It's sort of it's not an alternative telling of the Frankenstein story. It's a borrowing of some of the characters in the Frankenstein story and its author, who also features Peter Hamilton. Great North Road, planetary pleasure. It was pretty good. It's like in common with many of his books, a big fat book, 1,000 pages plus. There is a family called the Norths, who are sort of dynastic corporate entity that have cloned some of the scions of the family, and so their staff is clones. And as part police procedural, and that part's really fun. It's set in Newcastle in the future, not that far, a couple hundred years. So it's recognisably Newcastle. It's a recognisably metropolitan scene, but there's a lot of high-tech gadgetry, including kind of nano dust, which allows the police to reconstruct events. So everything is recorded and they can reconstruct events. So that part bit's pretty cool. And there's another part set on another planet, and there is a potentially kind of alien thing, which is going to get them all. Brian Stableford, House in Drift. It's the first of, I think it's 6 books in the Hooded Swan series. And this one, the pieces of this that I enjoyed are the sort of interlink between the pilot and the ship, the Hooded Swan itself. I thought that was pretty good. Hammer of God is a cosmic catastrophe in every sense. It promised a lot and delivered very little. It was just boring. Again, cardinal sin for me. Boring. Then we've got the Hercules text by Jack McDevitt, same guy that wrote Engines of God. I think I enjoyed that quite a lot more than the Engines of God. It's his first book, and it was in the Ace Specials, I think the 3rd series, which was all first time publications for debut novels, and it tells the story of the receiving of the SETI scientists receiving a signal from the far reaches of space. And that signal, as is often the case of these things, is mathematical in nature, and they sort of unpick it and unravel it, and it reveals more and more information. It's about how does humanity deal with that information when they get it? What impacts might it have from a religious, from a philosophical, from a scientific, from a political point of view? And all of those points of view are delivered by different characters who play the part of the different perspective in the book, and it is pretty good. House of Rumours by Jake Arnott, I think is a stellar splendor. Barely really science fiction, except that it involves some science fiction authors, some real and some imagined, and the structure's interesting. It's structured like a 32 card tarot deck. So each of the cards is represented, so it might be death, for example. That chapter, which could be quite short or quite long, will be about death in some respect, and similarly for all the other cards in the deck. Each of the vignettes is kind of loosely connected to one or more of the others. There's not really a through plot. We follow some of the same characters through history, through the kind of 1920s, 30s golden age science fiction, all through to the to the 70s and 80s, but what I remember is the structure and the kind of vibe of it rather than the plot itself. But I did enjoy my time. Now then, Hopeland by Ian MacDonald, galactic gem for sure. When I do a top 10 of my year's reading, that's going to feature large. I think, what can I tell you? It's set in our world effectively, but with some magical realism elements to it, and it follows a voluntary family called the Hopelands, who over time have kind of congealed, and they are, somewhat like the Freemasons, span geographies, and they are like a country of their own. It sort of reminded me of the Hives in Ada Palmer's Terra Ignota series, a little bit like that. There are a number of themes in here. There's responses to climate change. I like the found family, the voluntary family aspects of it. That's always a hot button for me. I like the characters and the interplay between the two leads, a female lead and a male lead. I liked the scope and the sweep of it. There's an excellent section set in Polynesia, which is a little bit bizarre. There are a lot of island hopping. I don't think he deliberately did it, but that's the way that it worked. It was sort of like on the kind of liminal spaces, the edges of the world. Polynesia, Hawaii, Iceland, Greenland, England, okay, a little bit less remote, Ireland. The scope of it and the found family of it were, I think, the things that I really enjoyed, and that was among my favourite reads of the year. Let's leave it there. Talking of favourite reads of the year, what's this one? House of Suns. I want to give that stellar splendour. House of Suns by Alistair Reynolds, standalone space opera. It's not set in the Revelation space universe, and it follows a family of clones, effectively clone siblings, who individually circumnavigate the galaxy over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, and they meet up from time to time to share memories and what they've discovered and their cache of knowledge and information. And someone is out to get them, and for reasons that become apparent later in the book, and there's death and mayhem as a result, and lots of fleeing, and there's the scope and the scale of it, again, I think is impressive. There's a effectively a car chase scene, but in spaceships, that spans thousands of light years and takes decades, if not centuries, of real time, and managed by hypersleep or whatever. Really good. That's a reread for me, but I didn't remember a thing about it. I read it when it first came out, and I didn't remember really anything about it at all, so it was like reading it for the first time. In Ascension, that's not there, that goes on the top as a galactic gem. What I most appreciated in this book was the writing. I listened to it on audiobook, and I thought the narrator did a great job too. It was narrated by a female, and that worked because the lead character is also a female, and I think she did a really good job. It follows a Dutch lady who has a kind of traumatic, troubling childhood, although she survives to tell the tale. She ends up being a research scientist on a mission in the mid-Atlantic to investigate early forms of life, and they're diving down to the trenches. There's a trench has appeared that's deeper than the Marianas Trench, a lot deeper, and there are things at the bottom of it which they have to investigate, and then that morphs into a mission to deep space to seek out something similar, and other stuff happens. Involution Ocean, which is Bruce Sterling's first book. I think that's cool. Planetary pleasure, slender book, quick read, set in a crater on an asteroid or a moon or something. It's like 50 kilometers across, something like that, or maybe it's 500. And it's the walls, the sides of this thing are very, very deep. I think it's 50 kilometers deep, and the floor of it is covered in a very fine dust or sand that behaves like a fluid. Cover suggests there's a sailing ship involved, and I really enjoyed the descriptions of the wildlife that lives in this sea, most of it not friendly, and I really enjoyed the relationship between the protagonist, who's a bit flawed, the drug addict. He's on this mission for reasons of his own, not good ones, and the ship's lookout, who is an alien, I think, or a modified human that has wings. Inherit the Stars by James P. Hogan. Where am I going to put that? I think Planetary Pleasure as well. Inherit the Stars is a planetary pleasure. It is a fun story, puzzle and mystery solving exercise. Some astronauts find a dead astronaut on the moon. A bit of carbon dating shows that he's been there for 50,000 years, which is obviously impossible. Quite a lot of the book is figuring out how could this be possible, and they do eventually figure it out, and that broadens things out at the very end of the book, which sets the next book up, which I haven't read yet, but pretty good, serviceable certainly. Out of the Dark by David Webber. I think I'm going to have to give this nebulous narrative. There were some parts of it that I really enjoyed. So this is an alien invasion story, and it's pretty kinetic at the beginning. Humanity gets its ass kicked at the very start of the book, and there are some plucky cells of resistance, some kind of purloined military equipment, some sort of elements of the armed forces that are still functioning. Most of them got flattened in the opening minutes, and then humanity gets some help from unexpected sources. It was fun, but silly. A confection. I enjoyed it. There is a sequel, I think another 2 books that follow on, but not something that I'm going to rush to read, I don't think. Lake of Darkness by Lake of Darkness, Adam Roberts, is a stellar splendor. Adam Roberts has become an automatic buy for me. I enjoy his writing, and there's actually a chat with him on the channel earlier in the year if you want to go and look at that. Nice chap. And this book is set in a future sort of utopia where people can kind of decide what they do. It borrows elements from the culture, I think, but with a slightly kind of different slant. And it's so utopian that nobody needs to learn or do anything because the AIs do everything for them. So the people there are basically idiots, and they can't read. Why don't need to read? Because the AIs can do it for me. But they go to there's an exploration mission for kind of fun, for shits and giggles, to a black hole to try to gather some information, to learn a bit more about it. And there's something in the black hole that messes with the crew's mind, and there's death and mayhem result, and then a sort of containment exercise that follows. And there's a really mad section in the middle, which, apart from servicing one plot element later in the book, doesn't belong in the book at all, in my humble opinion. But it was fun. It was a very Jules Vernean section where there's a guy, a bored kind of rich person in this utopia, has decided that he wants to be the first person to walk on the core of a planet, the molten core of a planet. So there's a big setup for how he goes about doing that, and then the technical accomplishments that go with it. And then, like I say, some of that tech is then borrowed for later in the book. It was quite a lengthy section, just for that purpose, but I did quite enjoy it. What have we got here? Another Adam Roberts, Land of the Headless. I think I would also give that. Why can't I go up? It's a bit annoying. A stellar splendor. So Land of the Headless is set on a planet, somewhere in the future. Humanity's colonized a bunch of planets, and this is a religious fundamentalist planet. Some sort of mashup of fundamentalist Christianity and Islam. And the punishment for even relatively minor crimes is decapitation, the beheading, which sounds very medieval. But in this world, it's not the end of your life. Yes, your head gets chopped off, but your brain's been downloaded into a box, which also allows you to speak, but you've got no head. So the thing that really stands in my memory from this is the imagery. So you've got people wandering around with no head, and just the concept of that is discombobulating. Just trying to imagine what that looks like, because we're so much of who we are and how we feel is in our heads. The idea of losing it is and then continuing to live is quite bizarre. And so just imagining people wandering around with no heads, and there's quite a lot of them, is quite something. There's some good military scenes involving kind of headless shock troops, which is also pretty good. But like I say, the imagery is the thing that stayed with me the most. KW Jeter, Blade Runner 2. It's The Edge of Human. Planetary Pleasure, I think. Yeah, pretty good. I didn't really know what to expect by that. I'm a fan of the Blade Runner movie. I haven't, I confess, read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. But Jeter does a pretty good job. I think it is a follow-up to the movie. I think that's the most important thing to say. But in this one, he messes again with that sort of, is a replicant a human, or is a human a replicant? And he adds an extra dimension into it by creating the idea of a template, a person upon whom a line of replicants was based. Is someone a replicant, or are they a human template that looks like a replicant? Adding a new whole dimension to it, so really kind of establishing the point of where does the blurred line between humanity and artificial intelligence lie. Lord Valentine's Castle. Where's it gone? Lord Valentine's Castle. I want to put him up the top. Galactic Gem, a surprise hit for me. Robert Silverberg's writing obviously is very good. This was post his Purple Patch in the late 60s and early 70s. This was published in 1980 after a gap of several years where he wasn't writing science fiction. Arguably, this is fantasy rather than science fiction. I think it's sufficiently science fiction to justify the label. There is a little bit of what appears to be magic involved, but you could argue that's just simply technology that we don't yet understand. But anyway, the big picture is it's set on an enormous planet, Magipur, which is home to several species of alien, including a bunch of humans. They all live reasonably harmoniously. And then we meet Valentine, who is a young man with no memory, can't remember anything. And then it's his story of rediscovering his destiny and then going to find it. It's really a tour guide to Magipur, and I certainly wanted to go there by the time I finished it. I thought it was really good. Majored on the world building, less so on the plot. The characters were strong too. I enjoyed the characters. I liked spending time with them. What else have we got here? Empire of Fear. Now then, this was a game of several parts. A couple of them I really liked, and then 2 or 3 of them I thought were pretty dull. So I think overall, probably it's a nebulous narrative. I don't recall what I gave it at the time. So this is set in an alternative Europe and Africa too, where vampires are a thing. The aristocracy and the leaders of the world are the undead, sort of effectively immortal vampires. And that means that plenty of the leaders in this world are hundreds of years out of place from where we would expect them to be. So Richard the Lionheart features in this book, for example, when he should have been dead for several hundred years. And you're essentially following a sort of secret anti-vampire resistance who are trying to figure out what it is that creates vampires in the first place. Machine Vendetta by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It's the 3rd of the Prefect series. I enjoyed it while I was there. I honestly don't remember a great deal about it, so I'm going to go with Planetary Pleasure. It didn't do a lot for me in terms of being memorable, but I enjoyed it. Market Forces, on the other hand, was an unexpected hit for me this year. Would I put it on Galactic Gem? No, I'm happy with Stellar Splendor. So Richard Morgan, same guy that wrote the much more well-known Altered Carbon, I guess because of the TV series, but Market Forces I think is a more enjoyable book, and I think it's better from a plot point of view. It's set in the not too distant future in a very different London. Deals and contracts are made by on the basis of who wins in a sort of Mad Max battle of driving wits on the deserted motorways around London. And the protagonist is pretty unlikable, actually, although you do end up sympathising for him a bit at the end. But the descriptions of the car battles and the sort of office politics behind it I thought were really good. Completely different to Altered Carbon, completely different beast entirely, but I thought a better book. False Dawn by Chelsea Quinn Yarborough. This isn't in alphabetical order at all. It's talking nonsense. Anyway, whatever. Where would I put this? I would put this Stellar Splendor. So this is a post-apocalyptic book, very akin to The Road. There's a female protagonist who pairs up with a guy, having been a bit wary at the beginning, and they're just trying to get somewhere safe. Doesn't really matter where. A little bit like the father and the boy in The Road. And this is in a world where things have gone to shit. There are some years down the road past whatever event or sequence of events that's caused the things to fall apart. And there are roving bands of scavengers. The protagonist at the very early in the book gets raped, and she's quite badly affected by that. It's a pretty harrowing read, actually. And they basically struggle to survive in this world as they move from A to B. And I think if you enjoyed The Road and haven't yet read False Dawn, and you enjoy The End of the World, in literary form at least, then definitely give False Dawn a read. I really enjoyed it. Natural History by... I'm going to try and move this up slowly. Natural History by... Justine Robson. It was the first of hers that I've read, and how best to describe this. It's almost a little bit weird fiction. It reminded me in some respects of Perdido Street Station. So if you like the kind of weird off-kilter descriptions of the people and creatures in that world, then you might like this one as well. But I thought it's a really novel idea. There are unevolved kind of humans that might be augmented, but they're basically genetically humans. And then there are the forged, who are constructed and made for a particular purpose, but are human in their DNA. But you could have a human starship, a human freighter, a human terraforming machine, a bird form human, or whatever. And And then there are some kind of failed forgings who are sort of mutant beasts. And the forged are striving for political independence. On by Adam Roberts, Planetary Pleasure. I think I would have given it more than that, maybe a stellar splendor, just on the basis of the premise. But I thought it ended really abruptly. I think it mirrors, in some respects, Inverted World by Christopher Priest, in that the setup is that in this world everything is sideways, so life is clinging on to the vertical edges of this world. Gravity has been flipped, it seems, and the protagonist is allegedly 8 years old. So the opening paragraph also is similar to Inverted World in that it kind of tees up the world and then kind of unfurls from there. There's an overlong section in the middle, and the ending is very abrupt and didn't seem to be going anywhere. But I did enjoy the weird kind of on its side aspect of the book. I did feel like I had to tilt my head to try and imagine what was going on as I was reading it. Pilgrimage by Zena Henderson. Nebulous narrative. Okay, so this is a short story collection dressed up as a novel. The little vignettes of life and all out of sequence. And I think it was just a bit overly saccharine. I think if you only read 2 or 3 of them, it would probably be quite nice, and you go away feeling like that was interesting. But to read all of them in one go, I just felt like a bit sick afterwards, if you know what I mean. It was just a bit too much. City and the Stars. So first, let me say that I recognise that this is a book that many people really like and respect, and it's one of the greats. But I fucking hated it. I read a lot of Arthur C. Clarke when I was in my teens and enjoyed it a lot, and I've been really disappointed by what I've read by him recently. Rendezvous with Rama, read it last year, boring. City in the Stars, nothing really happens. There's no plot, no characters, there's big ideas, and I think it's fine to have ideas, but you really got to have something to hang the rest of the story on as well, and there just was none of that. I didn't get the sense of wonder that people seem to have with it. I just thought it was tedious, and I struggled through the end. It took me like a week to read it. It was quite a slender book. I just found it uninteresting. In contrast, let's go with Parable of the Sower next, which I'm going to put top rank. Galactic Gem. So this is another story of the fall, the breakdown of society, set in what was the future for Octavia Butler when she wrote it. It was about 30 years ahead, but is in our present. So it starts in late 2024. I read this last month, actually. And it tells the story of a black teenage girl. She's 15. She lives in a reasonably well-to-do neighborhood in a town somewhere north of LA. And outside the walls of their neighborhood, it's a typical kind of suburban cul-de-sac, but they've kind of fenced it off to keep the outside out. And unfortunately, the outside doesn't stay out, as the protagonist predicts. And they end up having to run for their lives. Okay, Gateway by Frederick Pohl. Nebulous narrative. Another really boring book. There's a lot of sitting around navel gazing on a space station and very little actually going to other places and finding out what's happening there. I quite like the premise of it. There's a sort of alien relic space station left over with a bunch of spaceships which are pre-programmed to go to specific destinations, but you don't know before you get on it how far away that is, how long it's going to take to get there, how much supplies you need to carry, how many people will the oxygen support for that duration. So there's an element of kind of Russian roulette involved in every journey, but the rewards could be great because what might be brought back, whether it's knowledge or artifacts, could be worth a fortune, and you get a cut of that. So that's the bargain that you're entering. But people frequently die, and there's some psychological trauma. There's a long and pretty tedious sections, I thought, with an AI psychologist, and there was too much of that, too much hanging around fretting about going and not enough going. When they were out and about and you were sort of living the peril with them, that was interesting. I quite liked that, but there was too much of the other stuff, and it just didn't work for me, I'm afraid. Record of a Spaceborne Few. I think I'm going to have to put that on a Nebulous narrative. I probably scored it more highly when I just read it, but on reflection. So Becky Chambers, sort of cozy science fiction. And so I've read 3 of the 4 Wayfarer books. I've got the 4th on my TBR for the rest of this month. I haven't got to it yet. I really enjoyed, surprised myself by how much I enjoyed A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I enjoyed A Closed and Common Orbit even more. But Record of a Spaceborne Few I thought was just a bit boring in comparison. Salt by Adam Roberts, a pretty good debut novel. I think I enjoyed that at least as much as Land of the Headless. So it was his debut novel. If you like the dispossessed, the contrast between the two types of society, then there's an element of that in Salt, I think, but it borrowed somewhat heavily, but done well. From the dispossessed, and there's elements of Dune is compared to Dune, really only in the respect of the descriptions of the environment. There's none of the sort of imperial politics or anything like that, but the descriptions of the harsh environment, which is, as the title suggests, salt desert essentially. So very little grows there. The soil is, you can't grow plants in it. So there's a lot of trials and tribulations and difficulties associated with it. And you get two protagonists, one who lives in a sort of anarcho-socialist kind of utopia where everyone is equal, and another which is a bit more hierarchical, and there's a sort of benign dictator that's the other voice, and you hear their very kind of closed-minded perspectives on what is marching rapidly towards being an open conflict between them. But really well done. I enjoyed it. Red Rising. Okay, so I enjoyed it. Looking at it and comparing it to On and some of the other books in here, was it that good? No, it probably wasn't. I listened to it in audiobook. It was fun, quite YA. I gather that it gets a lot darker as the series progresses, and that the writing also improves. I haven't read Beyond Red Rising yet. I will get to them at some point, but I think I enjoyed myself perfectly well while I was there, but it's like Hunger Games on Mars, basically. Revelation Space by Alison Reynolds. Stellar Splendor. It's a reread for me. I read it way back when it came out in the early 2000s, and I'd basically forgotten pretty much everything that happened in it. It's an archaeological dig that turns up some important alien relics, which kind of triggers a sequence of events. It's got a clever structure with three threads which are operating at different points in time. You have to be on your game to realise when things are happening, and the reason for that becomes apparent. It's to do with relativistic space travel and the time dilation effects, or just the amount of time that it takes to get from A to B in interstellar distances. Okay, I'm going to leave that one there as well. The Honour of the Queen is the second of the Ujima Flip Honor Harrington series. So where did I put the first one? Yeah, so I enjoyed this less than the first one. It was okay, not as interesting as the first one. So and I couldn't tell you what happened there. Really, it didn't stick in my mind at all. Closed and Common Orbit. I enjoyed that more than Record of a Spaceborne Few. I'll give it Planetary Pleasure. I liked that there's a circular plot. And it was focused on a couple of the characters from the first book, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I liked the way that worked. I really bought into the characters, and I enjoyed it. I'm leaving these ones here because they're sequels, and I want to do the first book first. But Roger Zelazny, Lord of Light, hated it. And again, I recognise that it's a book that lots of people love. They read it when they were young, and it's really stuck with them. I read it as a grumpy old man, and it didn't gel with me at all. Elements of it I really liked, but I didn't get I just didn't get it. I didn't get the Hindu pantheon. I didn't get the Buddhas, and I didn't get what was going on. That was just a massive distraction for me, so I didn't enjoy it at all. Harry Harrison, Make Room is a cautionary tale about population growth, uncontrolled population growth, and it's set in a jam-packed New York City. It's effectively a detective story with a difference. I quite enjoyed it. Man Plus, Frederick Pohl. Planetary Pleasure. I might have put it on the nebulous narrative just because it's a bit slow, but follows the story of a guy who ends up being a subject in his own experiment, trying to convert things are going to shit on Earth. It's polluted, climate change, blah blah blah, and we're looking to augment a human or to adapt a human so that it can survive notionally on Mars, but we suspect what they're really looking for is to be able to survive on Earth. And he goes through a extremely excruciating process of transformation, which is dealt with in some detail in the book, and then becomes this kind of otherworldly being afterwards. Pretty good. I enjoyed it. Mind Bridge by Joe Haldeman tells a story of a sort of telepathic link provided by an alien. I'll give it a Planetary Pleasure. Inevitably, so you have to be touching this kind of weird sponge-like alien in order to get the mental connection, and inevitably people end up using it as a sex aid, which does enhance the whole thing apparently, but it does involve touching a sponge whilst you're doing it. So, whatever floats your boat. Neuromancer, that's going to have to go up here somewhere, I think. We'll call it a galactic gem. Partly, I think probably it's carrying some freight just with its status, but I did enjoy my time there. I listened to it on audiobook, which I was advised might be problematic because of the way that the writing goes. But actually, it was okay. I probably will reread it in physical book format, but I got on okay with the Ujima Flip, the audiobook. Ken MacLeod's Newton's Wake, that was disappointing. Nebulous narrative. I just didn't get on with the characters. I didn't feel invested in them, and it was a job to figure out who was where and doing what and which factions were which. Too many factions. Robopocalypse, fun kind of popcorn book. As the name suggests, humanity's being killed off mostly by the robots, and it's like a found footage or journaled. It's a bit like World War Z in its. It's like a future history of the robot apocalypse, pulled together from various perspectives, a kind of found kind of video footage or recordings or whatever. There is a sequel, at least one sequel. I'm not in a hurry to read it. I had fun. It was fine. Boy on the Bridge, planetary pleasure. A loose sequel, or actually arguably prequel, to The Girl with All the Gifts, set in that same sort of fungal zombie world. I enjoyed it. The main character is an autistic kid who's super smart, and he is both physically and metaphorically the boy on the bridge between humanity and our zombie cousins. Yoon Ha Lee, don't remember a thing about it. It's Hex Arcade stories, it's short stories, nebulous narrative, don't remember a thing about it. Hot House by Brian Aldiss. This is a fix-up of, I think, 5 elements, and 2 of them are top-notch awesome, and I would, without hesitation, put them on Galactic Gem. Really compelling descriptions of a far future Earth where all of the evolutionary niches have been reoccupied by evolved plant life, and they fill every evolutionary niche, carnivorous and otherwise. There's very little animal life left. There are humans, but who are now green, knee-high, barely clinging on to life in the upper branches of these big kind of world-spanning trees. 2 of the stories are awesome, and then 2 or 3 of them I didn't think worked as well, and so I think that probably on average drags it down to a planetary pleasure. Ian M. Banks, Matter. I like Matter, one of my favourite Ian Banks books. It's set on a shell world that has kind of layers, huge thing, but it reads almost like a fantasy. While there are some elements of the culture and alien species and so on that very much science fiction trappings, there's a lot which reads like an epic fantasy, where one faction of humans is trying to take over one of the other levels, and there's some machinations and court politics that go with that. I really enjoyed it. Shelter. So Dave Hutchinson and Adam Roberts have collaborated to produce a series, so they alternate. So Dave Hutchinson did the first one, Adam Roberts the second, Dave Hutchinson the third, and Adam Roberts owes us a 4th book in his story. And I liked it because I like the end of the world, but also because I like their writing. And the cherry on the top for me is it's set literally up the road from me, a 10-minute drive from me, and I know the area that it's set in really well. It's my local patch. I've run there a lot. I've my kids have played football there, so I know the villages and towns and the byways and highways of the area. So it was really fun to imagine. So this is set, I think, 150 years after some celestial catastrophe. There's been sort of the sisters, so-called kind of meteor or comet strike that's devastated the world. The US is completely gone. France is completely gone. There's bits of Wales are completely gone. And there's basically everyone died, apart from very few hardy people that managed to scrabble enough shelter and food together to continue to survive. And it's that society that's then developed. Loved it. Bob Shaw, Orbitsville, planetary pleasure. It's a big dumb object story, effectively a Dyson sphere, and the exploration of the interior of it, and there's a massive long trek involved because inevitably they crash where they weren't supposed to, and there's tens of thousands of miles to cover on foot essentially, but strange things met along the way. Pretty good. It's a short book, a couple hundred pages, pretty easy read. Deathbird stories. Actually, I actually only read a few, so I'm going to have to call it Planetary Pleasure because I can't remember anything about it. So I'll give it a bang average score, and probably doing it a grave disservice. But I have only read 2 or 3 of the stories. I meant to go back to it, never got around to it. Fugue for a Darkening Island. There's a theme developing here. It's another end of the world tale. This one based on human migration. It's the story of sort of left-wing liberal lecturer at a basic level wants to be fair and to be equitable and to do the right thing by people seeking a better life. But in reality, when it comes down to it, and it's his family that are threatened, he takes some steps which he might have believed weren't possible. It's a very unlikable protagonist, but again, the description of things going to shit I quite enjoyed. Dragon Quest by Anne McCaffrey is a cosmic catastrophe. It's the second of the books in the multi-million best-selling Dragon Riders of Pern series, of which there are umpteen. I read the first one last year and I actually really enjoyed it, but this one I found didn't ever get going. I got irrationally distracted by the fact that all the men have apostrophes in their name and they all sounded similar, and I kept wanting to call them all T'Pau, the band from the 80s, and I just didn't get on with it at all. Even the dragons weren't cool in this book, so yeah, very much a cosmic catastrophe for me. Gregory Benford, In the Ocean of Night, Planetary Pleasure. It was good. It's a bit dry. It's the first book in what became 6-book series, the Galactic Center series. Which really, sometimes that series is described as being a series of 4 that starts at book 3. The first 2 are a little bit out there, don't involve some of the same characters that are in books 3 to 6. I gather, I've only read the first one. But yeah, I listened to an audio book. It was a bit dry, but I was engaged enough. I like the protagonist, Nigel Walmsley, who's a Brit out of place in NASA and pretty grumpy, irascible, Brit to boot, which resonated somewhat for reasons that I can't possibly imagine. Midwich Cuckoos, Planetary Pleasure for me, not my favourite Wyndham, kind of mid-tier. I enjoyed some aspects of it, but it for many people that's their top-notch Wyndham, but it didn't work for me in that way. Generation Ship, Planetary Pleasure, that's a story of a generation ship on which things don't go to pot, which is quite unusual. Normally the premise for a generation ship story is that things go horribly wrong on the journey. The ship's in good shape, the crew's in good shape, but as they approach their destination, things start to go wrong, mainly politically. It's how the political leadership on the ship responds to events that's the guts of this story. So it's a little bit like you suddenly got politicians and spin doctors and what have you on this ship trying to manage the situation and generally speaking failing, that I quite liked. Robert Reed Marrow, Planetary Pleasure. That's another story of an alien relic, a massive kind of planet-sized spaceship that's crewed by sort of superhumans for reasons which become apparent later in the book. Some of them are stranded in the core of this planet and they're there for thousands of years, so there's some pretty weird shit going on there that I really enjoyed. Haven, I'm going to put up with the other one. Where did that go? Yeah, so that's the sequel to Shelter, this one written by Adam Roberts. And there's a sort of Nigel Farage-like character in there that's pretty well done, pretty objectionable chap, who does reappear in one of the later books as well. And the protagonist is like a spy that's sent to get information. Okay, here we go. Infinity Gate. I would literally only just finished reading this week. Infinity Gate, I think, is going to be a stellar splendor for me. And I will do Echo of Worlds at the same time because they're effectively one book. Yep. So it's one story across 2 books. Yeah, you need to read both. It's a multiverse tale. There were some really interesting elements to it. There's quite a lot of it set in a version of Africa, specifically Lagos in Nigeria, which just happens to be the geographical location where quite a lot of the book is set. There is an empire called the Pandemonium, which spans thousands of worlds, parallel worlds, where at one point in each of the planet's developments, they've invented the step technology required to move from one from the same location on one planet to the location on another. And there's some quite fun stuff about the mechanics of managing the Empire across that kind of multi-dimensional worlds. There's no interstellar travel. That's all the planets are too far away, but we don't need to, because we can travel between actually an infinite number of Earths potentially. But some of them are dangerous. Some of them are populated by sentient machines, and we're at war. The Pandemonium is at war with the machine hegemony, and it's a story of preventing mutual destruction. And there's a core group of characters that I think worked really well. I really liked it. Look to Windward, one of my preferred Ian Banks books. I'm probably going to have to put that as Stellar Splendor. A Tale of Revenge, with some pretty cool aliens that didn't appreciate the culture intervention in their society, that went an intervention that went wrong and has repercussions. Let's put it that way. Okay, Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio. So this is book 2 of the Sun Eater, and I actually enjoyed this even more than Empire of Silence. This one's more because there are less fantasy elements, so there was quite a lot of fantasy elements in Empire of Silence, and Howling Dark was much more full-on space opera, but it's kind of gothic, epic in scope. Some really mad shit happens. Some echoes of Book of the New Sun in some of it. I had a great time reading it. It's right up my alley. There we go. What have we got here? Chris Beckett, Daughter of Eden. I'm going to move him up to... I enjoyed this one. Yeah, not as much as Dark Eden, but probably a bit more. I'm not really trying to rank these within the grades, but just for comparison, I enjoyed it more than Daughter of Eden. There's a character called Angie, who's got a facial deformity, and sort of they typically don't get on well in life, but she's a trooper, and I really enjoyed her as the main character. Okay, we can do Kingdoms of Death now. No, we can't. We can do Demons in White, which is the 3rd book in the Sun Eater series, and I really enjoyed that. That's going to have to go up here with these guys as well. So I probably enjoyed Howling Dark a little bit more than Empire of Silence. So this was, I think I rated this as like a 9.5, along with Demon in White, and then Empire of Silence was a 9. Had a whale of a time reading them. Not so much Kingdoms of Death. The first half of it was really dull. I think he was trying to, if I could be harsh, trying to ape unsuccessfully Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. We sort of visit a sort of somewhat communist type planet with totalitarian view, but it's a bit wooden and it's a bit slow. The first half kind of sucked, really, actually, in comparison to the rest. Redeemed entirely by absolute carnage in the second half. The second half was insane, and I think Rocchio took a leaf out of George R.R. Martin's book. It was like the Red Wedding in space. Let's just put it that way. I enjoyed the second half a lot. Not so much the first half. It was a bit of a slog to get through. Pluto Shine. I really enjoyed. I think I'm going to put that at Stellar Splendor. It's set on Pluto, as the name suggests. We're in the sort of future where we can terraform planets, and there's a terraforming mission and a scientific base on Pluto, and a terraforming mission which is going to work to turn it into somewhere habitable for humans, both in terms of temperature, light, and breathability. But at the heart of it is a partnership between a friendship between a terraforming guy whose job it is to bring light to the world, and a traumatized girl who, I forget how old she is, kind of 10, 11, that sort of age, maybe a bit younger. The source of her trauma is gradually revealed as the book goes on, but it's about their friendship. It's entirely non-creepy friendship between this guy and this girl. There's a lot of love there. I really like that aspect of it. I think it was good. I'm hopeful that she'll write some more science fiction. She's a working scientist. She works in nuclear chemistry, I think, if I remember rightly. Okay, what else we got here? Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It was okay, nothing special, serviceable, as the perhaps the name suggests. I enjoyed my time there. It was one of those kind of mid-level Tchaikovsky's. It's sort of it pays its kind of table stakes, and it's good enough. But no more than that, I don't think. Sanctuary is the 3rd book in that series with up here with Haven. This one written by Dave Hutchinson again. I really enjoyed it. mainly for the buzz I get from the fact that it's set locally. So that was a major win for me. I think if it wasn't set locally to me, if it was set like far away, I would have had probably a less good time. So that was important to me. Solaris, okay, controversially, not the first time. I'm going to call this a nebulous narrative. There were elements of it that I really enjoyed. So the kind of claustrophobic, weird elements on the space station amongst the scientists, the things that they're going through, the weird effect that the being on the planet below them is having on them were interesting. But there were long sections of academic exposition which I just found deeply, deeply tedious, and I started to skip them eventually, and so it didn't work for me for that reason. Shards of Honor, Planetary Pleasure. That's the first of the sort of a prequel to the Vorkosigan saga, which I continue to hear very good things about. It comes recommended to me by a couple of science fiction authors who are on their game. So who am I to argue? And she sold like a bajillion of them. So what do I know? It was a little bit too lovey-dovey for me. Apparently the series picks up when Miles Vorkosigan is on the scene, their son. So this is like the origin story, if you like, for the saga. So it's his mother and father meeting and their sort of cross-cultural issues that they have. I've just picked up the second one, Barrier, which I haven't yet read. So Trading in Danger is the first of the Vatters War saga, and where did I put so I'm going to put this on Stellar Splendor. It's probably somewhere in between. I enjoyed it more than on Basilisk Station. It's the first, it's a young female protagonist. She's got kicked out of cadet school for reasons. She is the scion of a corporate family who are interstellar traders, and she goes about rebuilding her reputation. She's given a sort of job to keep her out of the way, to take an old ship to be scrapped essentially, and she gets into all sorts of bother along the way, but handles it very well. I enjoyed the protagonist. I enjoyed the sort of the world in which it's happening, the universe in which it's happening was pretty cool. And I've read the second one as well, Moving Target, which I enjoyed similarly. I'm going to try to put that up here. Where's it gone? Yeah. And that the story basically continues from where we left off, only it starts pretty explosively with the death of most of her family. Someone's out to get the Vatters for whatever reason. It doesn't become completely clear in this book, and so she has to dodge various attempts on her life whilst trying to build her reputation and to try to rebuild their business along the way. And again, she's smart. She's thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead of the people that are railed against her. She's her interpersonal skills are good. She's good at building loyalty in her crew, and I enjoyed those aspects of it. Stone by Adam Roberts. Let's put that up. That is, I think, I enjoyed it more than On. It's a story of, it's a pre-space opera. It borrows some elements from the culture. The setup is a guy is in a stellar prison, so he's in this kind of force-filled prison in the interior of a star, allegedly impossible to escape from. He's a rare breed, a serial killer. And he's been stashed away there because this utopian society doesn't know what to do with someone that kills people. And he's contracted by someone to go kill the population of an entire planet for reasons that become apparent. So a really interesting take on interstellar travel, which involves a backpack and some foam. There's no starships involved. I enjoyed that. Snow Crash. Where's that gone? Planetary Pleasure. I think that's fair. I enjoyed it less than... Is it? No, okay. I enjoyed it. I read it before I read Neuromancer, and I enjoyed it at the time, but I was hopeful that Neuromancer would be better, and I think it is. Some Desperate Glory, the Hugo winner from last year. Planetary Pleasure. I liked what you did with it. There were some things which kind of subverted my expectations, and I was surprised by that. I enjoyed. Not for everyone, I suspect. Ian Banks, Surface Detail, too complicated, too many parallel plot threads. Some of it I thought he could have binned without affecting the story at all. But I did enjoy 1 or 2 of the protagonists, and I enjoyed the comeuppance, which is delivered in spades at the end of the book. Take Back Plenty by Colin Greenland is a space opera. And this was an attempt to put the fun back in space opera in the 1990s. The protagonist... the hell's her name? I can't remember her name. I'll put it on the screen. Is fun. She's a black woman. She's pretty sassy, pretty smart, can think on her feet. and she gets into a spot of bother on Mars and has to take on some clients that she'd rather not taken on, and they appear to be a troupe of entertainers but have ulterior motives and purposes which become apparent as the book goes on. I really enjoyed my time there, and I'm going to read the ones that follow on. Paul Anderson, Tau Zero, a planetary pleasure. There were elements of it that I don't think that's fair. Stellar Splendor. So this is a story of a spaceship which can't slow down. It's continually accelerating, and the relativistic effects that has as it gets faster and faster and faster and closer to the speed of light. And it's pretty mind-blowing stuff from a physics point of view. I enjoyed at least as much the interplay with the crew. I thought he did that pretty well as well. So it was not all dry science. There is some people stuff as well that I think works quite well. The Chrysalids, another one of my favourite John Wyndham's. That's going up here. Is it Galactic Gem? I think it probably is. It's my second favourite John Wyndham book, and one of the ones that I've read a number of times since my teens. Cracking book, and I enjoy it because it's got more world building than required in most of his books. Most of his books are set in a recognisable England, and this one is set in the future in Canada, post-apocalyptic events, 200 or 300 years previously, that has knocked us all back to the agrarian past. And it's a sort of religious fundamentalist world in which mutations will not be tolerated. There are abominations that will be dealt with, whether it's plant, animal, or human. Crystal World. Now, me and J.G. Ballard have a troubled relationship. I had only read one book by him, and that was Crash, and I really hated it. I probably should read it again at some point and see if if I was just in a bad mood or something at the time. But I think it's several people have told me it was a bad place to start with Ballard. I should have started with short stories or one of his early sort of disaster books. And so I picked up with some trepidation The Crystal World, and I quite enjoyed it. I didn't blow my socks off or anything, so it's kind of mid-tier, but I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the visualizations that he gave. I enjoyed the effect on the people. The characters were a bit kind of take them or leave them, but I enjoyed the images that he conjured up, to put it that way. Demolished Man is an old favourite of mine, and one of the first science fiction books that I read, so this was a reread for me. I'm going to put that up on Stellar Splendor. I think I prefer it, in fact, to Tiger, as will become apparent. So this is a detective story, effectively, a police procedural, a whodunit, where the murderer is actually known to the police, but they can't prove it. So it's in a world where telepathy is a thing, and there are espers who can read your mind. And so how do you commit the perfect crime when the victim knows that you're going to do it and the police know that you did it? The saving grace here is that that evidence isn't admissible in court. So the detective of the piece has to find a way to prove that he did it without using mental evidence. I think it's really good. There are some kind of hokey bits in it involving the 11 o'clock rocket to Venus and stuff like that, which is a bit implausible, but generally speaking, I really enjoyed it. The aforementioned The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin is really good. I enjoyed it. I haven't read too many of hers, mainly the Earthsea books. I think this was the first of the Hainish books that I've read, and it's a story of two societies told through one protagonist. He's a citizen of, I forget the name of it now, the moon of another planet, and there was a revolution a couple of hundred years previously, and all those people buggered off to this world, which is resource poor. It is lacking in good soil. There's not much there. So a nice contrast between the styles of society. You're left to decide which works better. The Explorer by James Smythe did some interesting things, but was a bit slow. The Furies, yet another end of the world tale. There's a theme developing here. I'm going to put that up here as a Stellar Splendor. Another it was Wyndham-esque in its style, and I think that was deliberate on Keith Roberts' part. There's a double catastrophe. There's some sort of cosmic event which causes severe earthquakes around the world, which fucks things up for everybody. And then there is an invasion of giant wasps, which kind of add to the woes. And that's pretty funny. It's almost like a B movie in book form, but kind of very well written. Talking of the end of the world, as we very much were, Thomas M. Dish, Genocides, I think that's going to have to go up there as well. It's this kind of sticky and nasty. Aliens seed the world with their own plants that they kind of mindlessly harvest at some point, kind of heedless of the impacts that has on the Earth, which are severe. Let's put it that way. And it's a story of a small group of people that try to survive in this world and largely fail, it turns out. The Hydrogen Sonata, Planetary Pleasure, not one of my faves. It was the last book that he wrote in the Culture series, and some aspects of it I really enjoyed. There's a nice scene at the end. Well, I mean, I did enjoy it, but there's some parts of it that I really enjoyed towards the end on an airship which is full of water, which I quite liked. The Man in the Maze, quite a recent read for me. It was all right. Not one of my favourite Silverbergs. A bit slow, didn't really go anywhere or do anything. There were some parts of it that I liked, but generally speaking, it didn't work as well as, for example, A Time of Changes or Up the Line. So I think it's mid-tier Silverberg for me. The Man Who Would Be King is a novella by Adam Roberts. Nothing special, pretty short read, and I enjoyed it maybe less than I should have done, because I hadn't realised that the title was The Man Who Would Be Kling, not King. So it's a take on the Rudyard Kipling tale, which became a movie. It's set in the Afghani zone, and the protagonists are two Star Trek cosplayers who want to prove non-humans can safely enter the zone. They are in fact human, but they so deeply believe that they're a Klingon and a Vulcan that they think they can circumvent the zone. A bit bonkers. Many Coloured Land by Julian May. That's an audiobook. I thought for decades that was a fantasy novel, but it's not. It's very much kind of light end of science fiction. I listened to it on audiobook. I have the others on my shelves. I may get to them at some point, but I don't feel in a huge rush to do so, having read it. It was all right. Similarly, The Martian Race. There is a sequel to that as well. I read that quite recently. And it's okay. I like Benford's writing, generally speaking. It is very sciencey and plausible, kind of hard science fiction, but I think he does an okay job with the characters as well. I quite liked it. Mercy of Gods. I liked it more than some. I don't think it quite is worthy of a stellar splendor, so we'll leave it down here in Planetary Pleasure. But I think it did a serviceable job of teeing up the trilogy. It's a very obvious first book of three, and so it's moving pieces around the board to be ready for the middle book. And I think it suffered for not being The Expanse. I think people that enjoyed The Expanse that maybe don't read a lot of science fiction will have gone into this thinking, yay, more of the same, and it's not. It's more overtly science fiction-y than The Expanse, I think, and I quite enjoyed it. I'm certainly ready to read the rest. The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Some typically big ideas. The plot didn't flow that well for me, but it's essentially a recipe book for how we might handle the effects of climate change, and to mitigate them and to kind of slow things down or reverse some of the impacts. And there's some cool kind of planetary scale geoengineering that goes on that I enjoyed. Ursula Le Guin, The Other Wind. I can tell you very little about it. It's the fifth of the Earthsea books she wrote in the early 2000s, I think. And the wizard of the piece, who I keep wanting to call Rincewind, but that's the name of the of the wizard from the Discworld, the early Discworld books. I forget his name. Is an old man, and he's kind of retired, but he kind of comes out of retirement for this book. But much more than that, I don't remember. But you know, it was fun at the time. The Outward Urge, my least favourite of the John Wyndham post-war novels. It's kind of a fix-up of 5 short stories. It was nothing special. The Rift by Nina Allen was a recent read, and I think that's a stellar splendor. It's a story of 2 sisters, one of whom disappears for reasons that become apparent when you read the book, and she reappears, and she's assumed dead by everybody. She's assumed to have been murdered by a serial killer, and her body hidden. But she reappears 20 years later, and I'm not spoiling anything that's on the back of the book. And she has to try to convince her sister and her family that she is who she says she is, and to convince them of her story, that she's actually been off on another planet. In another galaxy, where she was transported by a rift in the space-time continuum. And it's an extremely compelling story, and very realistic and believable, but obviously stretches belief, and it's about what her sister chooses to believe and why, and the links between the two of them, and the rifts between parents and children, between sister and sister, and between, yes, the space-time continuum. I really enjoyed it. Let's see, how are we doing? Oh, not too bad. Fritz Lieber, The Wanderer, and the best thing about it is the cover art with the perky cat lady. It's overlong. There's too many characters that don't serve any purpose other than to give us a brief glimpse of the catastrophe that commences after an entire planet, or what appears to be a planet, appears in our orbit, and the gravitational effects that has on the Earth. So there's earthquakes, there's tsunamis, it was 100 to 150 pages too long, and great swathes of it could have been cut out, and it would have been a better book, I think. Robert Silverberg, Thorns, sort of similar, I probably enjoyed it a little bit more than The Man in the Maze, but still, it was not my favourite Silverberg, mid-tier for me. It's about a sort of emotional vampire as a corporate executive, a magnate who tees up a reality TV show as prescient of Silverberg to imagine this situation. He tries to find the unlikeliest couple who are inevitably going to fail and get him good viewing figures, and it's about how that story develops. It's okay, but I didn't love it. Tiger or The Stars My Destination. I liked this less than The Demolished Man, but a classic all the same. To the Stars and Back, that's a short story collection I read quite recently. I think Planetary Pleasure. As I said before, I struggle a little bit with short stories to maintain the enthusiasm, and what I probably should do is not try to read them as a block and just dip in from time to time. But I actually enjoyed nearly everything in this book. They're all pretty recent. They're all written or commissioned especially for this collection, which is a tribute to Eric Brown. There's 2 or 3 standouts that I really enjoyed. To Your Scattered Bodies Go. I think that probably belongs in Planetary Pleasure as well. Mid-tier. It's an intriguing premise. Everyone has died and has reincarnated on Riverworld by the banks of this infinite river. And there's an exploration mission. There are reincarnated Nazis like Hermann Goering who try to. It's utterly insane. It's like a fever dream. But I did quite enjoy it. Chris Beckett, Tomorrow, is another book that I really enjoyed. Bit difficult to explain what goes on there. It's a mosaic of a novel, and it's all out of sequence. It's little chopped up vignettes of one man's story on what appears to be Earth but might be somewhere else, and with some weird wildlife. And it's a story by a man writing a novel about a man writing a novel, if I can summarize it very reductively. But it's the writing is seductive. I liked the way that it was meshed together, and there is a through line, but it's a little bit, you have to kind of construct it as you go from the various bits and pieces. I think cleverly written, and I did enjoy my time there. Tower of Glass, another Silverberg. I did enjoy that. Where's he gone? I probably enjoyed that more than Thorns and more than Man in the Maze. But again, another mid-tier Silverberg for me. Didn't hit the high notes that Time of Changes or Up the Line did for me. John Wyndham, Trouble with Lichen. I will give that a stellar splendor. Not my fave, but pretty close to it. I really liked the female protagonist, and I liked the premise, which was what would happen if we invented an anti-aging treatment that gave you not immortality but an extremely long life, and what would be the implications of that for society, which vested interests would that affect, and what might those vested interests do to prevent it from happening. I liked it. Tusks of Extinction, it was okay. It's a novella. It's by the same guy that wrote Mountains in the Sea, which I did enjoy last year, and the premise of this story is an elephant expert is downloaded, she's dead, she's downloaded into the brain of a mammoth, who a series of whom have been reincarnated from DNA and set loose, but they don't know how to be mammoths because they haven't got the sort of instinctive memory to know what to do. So she basically teaches them how to be mammoths. It's an interesting premise, and I quite enjoyed it. Sue Burke, Use of Patience. This is the 3rd book in what was a duology of semiosis and interference. I read it on my phone on a sort of an advanced reading copy, and that did affect slightly my enjoyment of it. I will buy, I think it's out now actually, I will buy the physical book and probably give it a reread. I really liked the first 2, and I was ready to enjoy this one, and it was okay, but I think I'm going to reread it, as I say. Where are we? War of the Maps by Paul Macaulay, the second of his books that I've read, and I think it's a planetary pleasure. Yeah, yeah, okay, we'll give it a stellar splendor. There was enough interesting in it to justify that. It's a story of genetic maps as well as physical ones, and we're on a artificial world, orbiting an artificial sun, and nobody really knows or can remember how they got there or why they're there, but there's a genetic invasion which is changing and impacting life, and the protagonist is an interesting character. It's like a sort of man with no name, and his weapon is a staff. He's a kind of a cop of sorts. It's pretty good. And finally, then, the 139th of my reads this year is what I call Them Back from Heaven, which is a tale of promised immortality. I think I'm going to leave that on Planetary Pleasure. And so this is the story of a all-powerful corporation that's got rich, is the richest thing on the world, on the promise of delivering immortality, and it's busy storing people, freezing them for the future when it will have this ability to bring them back and give them immortal life. And the people that are still alive are busy saving for not just their retirement in this life, but future lives, because it's expensive for storage, and they've got to have an investment nest egg. So cool premise, and we follow a guy who was an executive at the corporation who ends up getting booted out for reasons that become apparent when you read it. So anyway, so that is my tier ranking of the 139 science fiction books that I read in 2024. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.